Hey!
All right, I got it figured out.
Perfect. Glad you're here.
My first time of doing this, so thank you for your patience.
No problem at all. It's always a bit of a roll of the dice to see how long it takes to connect the whole thing. But
all right,
it's getting pretty reliable. We appreciate those of you who are tuning in. This is maybe our third talk at noon on Tuesdays as part of the ACP Spotlight Lecture Series. So we'll have about a 20-minute discussion here today with Teri Darnell. And Teri is one of the artists, one of the Georgia photographers who has work on the Georgia Fence, which is kind of a sister project to the international fence that's currently on view on the Atlanta Beltline's East Side Trail. The Georgia Fence is over here on the Westside Trail, right about where the Beltline crosses with MLK, right there at the overpass. So it's currently on view. So right after this chat with Teri, you can go over there and look at her work and the work of the other artists included. With that, I just want to say welcome, Teri Darnell.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on here.
Glad you're here. And I just looked in my camera roll to see if I could get some of your images up. And for some reason, they're not showing up like they weren't last week. I might futz with that a little bit and try and get that to work while we're talking. But I think generally, you've done kind of a great American road trip. I don't know if it's the great American road trip, but it was definitely great and it was definitely American. You went to all these states to make images for this project, which specifically focuses on VFWs. Is that the right way to call them? Do we call them VFW halls?
Yeah, you can call them VFW halls or VFW posts. Really, VFW stands for Veterans of Foreign Wars. So you actually have to have served in a war to be able to join the VFW.
Now, that is your personal history. You have a VFW lifetime membership, and you were in the Army, correct?
I was in the Air Force.
Oh, sorry, swing and a miss.
No. So I can tell you a little bit about that if you.
I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I'll start with my military experience, and then we can move on to a little bit more about the VFW because, you know, probably a lot of people don't even know what the VFWs are. So I can be happy to explain that. So during the 1980s, I helped protect the freedom of the West Berliners while stationed at the Tempelhof Air Base in Berlin during the Cold War. And that was, before the collapse of the Berlin Wall. So my job was like an air traffic controller. I was called an aerospace warning and control systems operator. It's a long word for a job title. And so I protected the airspace that surrounded the 3 air corridors that were non-communist countries used to get in and out of Berlin. Those corridors were also used during the Berlin airlift, if you can remember about that time. So Tempelhof Air Base, was Hitler's headquarters. So when he was in power, and few people know that they also had a concentration camp there for political prisoners, and it was called the Columbia House. So at least 8,000 men were imprisoned in the Columbia House during the time that Hitler was in power. And those were primarily people that spoke out, were Jewish, were socialists, Democrats, intellectuals, and gay men. So at one point, there were over half of the 8,000 people in the prison were gay men. And then a lot of these prisoners, when they shut down the Columbia House, were sent to Sachsenhausen, which is another concentration camp just outside of Berlin. And that was primarily used for political prisoners too. So, there were meat hooks, and that was one of the things that I did when I was stationed in Berlin, as I was required during orientation to go to this place, this concentration camp, and it left an everlasting impression on me forever. So they had a lot of things that they showed us there, what happened to the political prisoners, and it was a horrific scene, and they had meat hooks lined up on the wall and showed us how these events took place. That's not my cat.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
We're,
I
this
do
is,
have three cats running around, so.
I think that was a child on my end, so
Yeah, oh,
apologies.
okay.
It's leaking
So
through.
basically, at that time, I understood the importance of our freedom and protecting our democracy, against our allies, for our allies, for ourselves, and against the control of communist power. Because I got to see that firsthand. I actually was able to go over to East Berlin, which was a communist country at the time, and see how people lived. So part of this, project is because of my love for veterans in our country, and I'd like to do everything I can to get more recognition for veterans.
It's fantastic, and it's incredible to hear that it's part of your personal journey, not just as a service member, but as an American and as a photographer, and you're able to weave all three of those things together. Can you take us just along for a little bit of the pre-planning before you left, or when did you, Teri, realize, oh my God, I gotta get in the car and I gotta go on this big trip? Like, how did the
Right.
how
Okay.
did the germ of an idea build up into that?
Well, it was about the beginning of 2017. My mom lives in Sun City Center, Florida. And I was driving by a VFW post, and they all have a number. That's how they're known. They're known by a number. So this was VFW post 6287, and it was in Apollo Beach, Florida. And I drove by this place, and it just, some curiosity struck me that I needed to make a U-turn.
Hmm.
And so, I just kind of put on the brakes and make a U-turn. And it's a lot of times those U-turns create a new place for me to go. It's like, okay, this U-turn changed my life. And I wanted to go inside, but I didn't even know if I was allowed to go inside, because I didn't know if I could even become a VFW member, because I knew nothing about VFWs other than my dad went occasionally, which not very often, but my dad did go. He was a war veteran, and he served in Korea. And when I went in there, I met this guy who was in this wheelchair, and he was just a small little guy, but he had on this gigantic baseball hat. And I said, "Hey, I really like your hat, your cap." And he said, "No, that's not my cap. That's my cover." And so I learned that as a Marine, you don't call it a baseball cap, or, that's your cover. And so I got to watch the night unfold, and I noticed that everybody knew each other, and they were all jabbing each other and joking with each other, and they treated each other like a family. And it was that moment of that day when I went in there and saw that kind of support and friendship with all of these veterans together, that I knew that was something that I needed to explore further.
That's so great. Now, as you started exploring it, are there like any kind of culture or even subculture? There can be levels to things. Is there a level to, let's say, if you're a World War II person versus a Vietnam War vet? Is there a hierarchy kind of within these communities? Is Air Force better than Navy? Is it
No,
all?
I don't think so. I don't think there's any hierarchy. Once you walk through that door, everybody's treated the same, whether you're an Army or Air Force, Marine, Navy, Coast Guard. It doesn't matter. They just treat everybody the same. It doesn't matter if you're an officer or an enlisted person. They're all there to help each other, and they're also there to help, support their community, because they largely get involved in a lot of community efforts. So we can go back to what the VFW, actually is.
Sure.
It's called the Veterans of Foreign Wars. It's a nonprofit service organization, and it started in 1899 after the Spanish War ended. So these troops came home, and they were just kind of left to themselves, to fend for themselves. When the war's over, you get kicked out of the service, and there's nothing there for you. No medical support, no financial support, so they formed this organization called the VFW, and it just grew from there. Right now, I wanted to tell you about this. In 1992, they had a high of about 2 million members, and currently it's just about 1 million members. And these are members not part of the auxiliary, which are the family members. And so it's decreased 100% since 1992. And the posts, if you drive around, sometimes you see these posts, you don't really even know what they are. They're just these brick and or cinder block buildings on the side of the road, and they look like they're just run down. Well, most of them are. And there were, in 1992, there were 9,000 of them. And today there's about 6,000. So they're slowly deteriorating and going away because they don't have this financial support. And one of the reasons for that is because what you had just mentioned is that these veterans are dying off. So the largest supporters of the VFW were like the World War I veterans who are gone.
Yeah.
The World War II veterans, there's about 300,000 of them left. And then the Korean War veterans, there's about 1 million. And then the Vietnam veterans, about 7 million. And then the Afghanistan and the Iraqi veterans. And that's where the distinguishing factors lie, is the VFWs really were mostly like the Korean War and the World War II guys hanging out. And then the veterans that were Vietnam veterans, when they came back from war, they didn't get the parades and all the special attention.
Yeah.
And they weren't really invited to the VFWs. These World War II guys and Korean guys didn't really want the Vietnam veterans there, so they didn't join.
It's interesting. I grew up in a military family. I'm not sure if we've ever talked about that.
No, we haven't.
My dad was in Vietnam, and definitely, if I'm recalling correctly, just wasn't entranced in any way by wanting to go to the VFW. He may have been and never told me about it, but I knew it was something that he was like, no thanks. And so maybe there's a little bit of a generational thing there.
There is a generational gap now because the Iraqi and the, that era of veterans, they're not really interested in joining because they think it's grandfather's VFW.
Yeah.
And so the VFW has been slow to change programs, and to recruit some of these younger members. And so that's one of the big reasons for the decline. But, the VFW serves, they spend a lot of time, the members, serving the community, like 9 million hours of service, last year alone. And they also go into the VA medical facilities. They have an unmet needs program, so they also work in the community and helping provide mortgage payments, childcare, food, and, and so much more, grants, and scholarships. And they do a lot of legislative acts for trying to get things for veterans like the Forever GI Bill and help financially for those veterans who had Agent Orange. So it's not just your grandfather's VFW with a bunch of, old men sitting around drinking at a bar. Right. It's much more than that. And that's what people don't know. They just don't recognize or understand the level of support that it goes both ways. It goes both ways for the veteran to get involved in the community and the community that the VFW helps support.
So as you were describing this U-turn you made in the road, like I know that a lot of photographers can relate to that cue when you stop thinking as like a person who needs to get somewhere and you start thinking like, oh, I need to slow down and go backwards and retrace my steps and actually spend some time here. So you had a great experience there. How did that start turning itself into you wanting to express this as a kind of photo documentary project?
Well, when I got home from my mom's, I started really thinking about that experience and thinking about that wonderful gentleman with that, Marine cap on and the honor that he had for our country and how it seems like that was just being lost. That part of American history is becoming lost. And I wanted to figure out how I could document that. So I started doing these little road trips from my house, and there's, you can look on Google Maps and just type in VFW, and I started seeing, oh my gosh, there's VFWs kind of all over the place. And so I started visiting them, and then around Georgia. And then every time I would go to my mom's, I would start expanding that out in Florida and going to different cities in Florida and capturing those. And I said, well, this isn't just local or a regional thing. It has to be a national project. And so I need to represent every single state in the United States and take at least one photograph of VFW in every state in the United States. And right now, because of COVID, I have not been able to go to Alaska, Hawaii, and Wisconsin. Wisconsin is like
you and Hillary
to get to. Yeah.
Sorry.
Right now, I am staying away from Wisconsin, at least until I can get vaccinated.
Yeah, right. It's bad there now, or COVID's bad there now.
Yep. So a lot of research. I mean, you think about 6,000 VFWs in the United States. I had to do a lot of research to try to figure out which are the best ones to go to, and how am I going to get there? And it was a very much a logistic issue. And one of the trips when I went across the United States to Washington State, you know, it's just so much driving that I asked my brother to go with me.
Nice.
So, yeah. So he helped me drive, and that was just a tremendous effort to do that for him, and very much appreciate it. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy.
In looking at the map of all these locations that you photographed, I'm not trying to like play a quiz game with you, but I was like, let me just ask her about one of these and see what comes up.
I don't know if I'll remember.
Okay, that's fine. It was interesting. I could see how you were hitting the corners of states, you know, because if you hit a corner, you can get kind of 3 states together. And I was like, I saw you going through Southwest Colorado. It looked like you went through Durango.
Oh, that was a beautiful drive.
Yeah, it's one of the most beautiful places in the country, and all those roads around there are incredible. And I was just wondering if that rang a bell.
Oh yeah, definitely went over that pass, and I think my brother and I can't remember exactly where we stayed. We had to find, there was no hotels.
Right.
You know, some of the times on these road trips, a lot of these places are in rural areas, and trying to find a hotel was a little bit of a challenge. And so we had to try to plan the trip to, you know, I tried to hit 2 or 3 VFWs every day and plan the trip where we could find somewhere to stay all night. And then I ended up staying in one, like a Airbnb, and it's like, really don't want to stay there again. So
I hear you.
Do the best you can.
What is your goal? Let's say somebody were to come across your website, or they were to see these on your Instagram, or even let's say they're out jogging along on this Westside Trail, and they see these pictures, they recognize them as VFWs. What's the thought that you want people to have in passing? Obviously, you can really engage them when you're talking to them, or when there's text involved, or maybe as a book project. But what do you want people to kind of come away with in an easy glance?
You know, when you pass by a VFW post, know that inside there are people that have served our country and have put their life on the line for our country, and they were willing to die for us. Those people are inside that hall looking for support and looking for friendship and trying to help each other out. Because I really want to talk about suicide, if you don't mind, if we transition.
Please. Yeah, please.
You know, so we lose an average of 20 veterans to suicide every day in America. You know, many of those veterans are, like I said, they're in rural areas, and they're losing access to the needed services that these VFWs provide, whether it's sitting around talking with other people who have experienced the same type of war situations that they have. Because, you know, veterans don't really talk about their war experiences. You know, they keep that inside. My dad was, like I told you, my dad was a veteran of the Korean War, and he had PTSD. And he would wake up in the middle of the night like he was sleepwalking, and he thought he was in the war, and he would punch his fist through the wall. He would throw televisions through the wall. And, you know, and it wasn't until he woke up did he realize what was going on. And then, you know, we tried to talk to him about it, and he said he was fighting in the Korean War, and he never got any help for that. And that's another reason that's promoting me to keep fighting for these veterans, you know, who have PTSD. You know, the suicide rate has jumped up from 16 a day in 2005 to over 20 a day right now. So it's not getting any better. And it's the greatest rate of the suicide is when people first get out of the military, because that's where they need the support the most. And these VFWs are the place that they can go to get that kind of support, because nationally, we do not have another organization in the United States, except for the American Legion, who was having the same problems, to help our veterans when they get out of war. Many of the people who are in rural areas, they live too far away from a VFW medical facility. Mm. And my dad, at the time, he lived 40 miles away from the VA, and he went to the VA, and they said there was nothing wrong with him. So this is happening to a lot of our veterans, and I really would like to see that change and have a national conversation about it. So when you're going by a VFW, think about who can you talk to, or who can you also have a conversation with to help support our veterans.
Teri, I want to thank you for laying it out like that. I want to thank you for this project, and I want to thank you for your advocacy. It's rare to... it's not rare, but it's great to have an example of somebody like yourself who has this personal history that's invested in revealing maybe a more hidden community of our current moment and bringing attention to it and saying, hey, let's take a look and think about how things could be better in the future. So thank you, Teri. Do you have anything else? I don't want to cut you off.
No, I really did. I just want to thank the jurors first for for selecting my images and to be a part of the Georgia Fence. And I also would like to thank the Idea Capital because they provided me with a grant to help fund my project. I mean, I've been to so far 110 VFWs and put 15,000 miles on my car and spent over $20,000 of my own money. So I want to thank them for that, and thank you, ACP, for including me in the Spotlight series, and also for all my friends, all my photography friends, and all your encouragement and support, because without you, I couldn't do this by myself. So thank you.
Absolutely. I do have one last question. Is there some future planning? Let's say once you get Hawaii, Alaska, and Wisconsin taken care of, do you have a kind of future idea of how you'd like this work to live its best life?
I would like to have a book, a photography book with showing the pictures and the stories, some of the members that I have come in contact with, and telling their stories and telling about the history of the organization. And I'd also like to have a national exhibition that could travel around the United States and get people involved and have a voice supporting this project. And so far, I haven't been able to get a publisher that would like to do this project. So if anybody has any ideas, please go to my website at www.Teri.com. Send me a message and let me know what you think. I'd be happy to talk with you about it.
Fantastic, Teri. Appreciate you taking time out for our noon Spotlight talk on Tuesday. We'll be back here next Tuesday at noon. And appreciate your work. And if you'd like to see the project, as I said at the beginning, it's on the Georgia Fence, which is on the Atlanta Beltline's Westside Trail as it crosses over MLK Drive. Thanks for being here, Teri.
Thank you, everybody.
We'll talk soon. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Cheers.
Bye-bye.